Hi, I'm back.
I'm back, I'm Jeffrey.
Hi, Jeffrey. In my last talk, I briefly introduced two of our extensions, Summary to Jira Comment and Wiki extensions. But here's a deeper dive into MixedVisibilityFiles. I'm still Daniel. I'm still here on behalf of WikiTech. Let's dive in. So we had some requirements from a user. They want anonymous users to be able to read all the pages on their wiki, including the file description pages. In other words, the group permissions should look something like that, where star, asterisk, everyone has read rights. Rights with an R. Additionally, they should be able to see the content of some files, the content being what is in the PNG, SVG, PDF, separate from the description, the actual image or file content. And logged in users should be able to see the content of all files. So this was our user spec. Developers added another requirement. We should not be hacking MediaWiki core with an asterisk. Basically, use MediaWiki as is and implement this logic in an extension, if possible. Don't replace the image auth entry point. Don't remove the index.php. Yeah, there's an entire essay on MediaWiki.org explaining why you shouldn't do that. So, there have long since, there are lots of examples of why you shouldn't try and do partial visibility for pages. Right? MediaWiki is not built for that. On the other hand, with images and files, there are a lot fewer output opportunities. There's a lot fewer places to leak. For example, if you look at the list of security issues with authorization extensions, who could tell me a way that page content might leak other than just looking at the page? Yeah?
You have a MediaWiki extension that doesn't give a hoot about any of the official APIs and just takes from the database directly.
Yes, if you have an extension that instead of using proper MediaWiki APIs just fetches content from the database, that is one way data can leak. I mean more of, if you don't have any other extensions installed other than lockdown or something, how can data maybe get out? Yeah? Search, yes. Search results can show a snippet of the content of the page that hits. Maybe the user shouldn't be allowed to see that page. You also have to filter it out of search. Transclusion, yes. If you embed a page somewhere else and the user can see that somewhere else, they shouldn't then be allowed to see the initial page. Preloading, if you try and use a page content as being preloaded when you're editing, that can leak it. There's a whole bunch of ways that your page content can leak out. On the other hand, the same MediaWiki.org site has a manual page for image authorization, where it talks about, okay, if you want to add authorization for who can see your images, what should you do? Here's how. And so that's what we did for MixedVisibilityFiles. We drew inspiration from the image authorization page, and we wrote an extension. And I'm sure you're all wondering, how does it work? It works well. Imagine if I just edited there. No. So we developed this against MediaWiki 1.39.15. That 15 is going to come, it will be relevant later. And if you look at the source code of the image auth.php entry point, most of the logic is in this one big global entry point called WF image auth main. And here is a general overview of the logic. Any comment in square brackets is me replacing one or more lines of original code or comments with an explanation. Because here is the part that we care about. After it sets up globals and gets the permission manager and the context request, a wiki is defined as public if the star asterisk group, everyone, has read rights. If it is not a public wiki, then the resulting headers will say, hey, this shouldn't be cached, and we will run a hook to see, for this page in particular, is a user allowed to read it? If it's not marked as or if it is marked as a public wiki, then there's no other point at which you can indicate, how about this one file? Is that meant to be public? So our first requirement, because we don't want to hack MediaWiki core and just replace the entry point, our first requirement is that the get group permissions call not result in the, Yeah, I'm hearing the feedback too.
It's not feedback.
Not feedback? Give us a second. Audio problems? How's that? Better? Worse? Still my voice. We just need to make sure that the permission manager, when you ask it for group permissions for the asterisk group, in this one call, it should not include the read writes. And that is what you need to do to prevent images from being cached. Now, we want the rest of the time the star group to have read permissions because we don't want to revoke that right. It's just in this one check. So we have two options. Sorry, before we get to those two options. Once we've said that, hey, once we've said that, hey, the wiki is not public, we can then implement the per file restrictions via the user can permission manager call, because that's going to run a couple hooks. And for now, we can just treat it as a black box of, should a file be public or not? There are plenty of ways to configure that, from a new magic word to the community configuration extension to an on-wiki list, like the bad images list. We can ignore that for now. So how does this get group permissions function work? Well, we need it to say the star doesn't have read writes at this one check, but it should have read writes everywhere else. So our options are either set our configuration to have those read writes and then somehow fix it so they don't in one place, or set the configuration to not have read writes and do that somehow fixing magic every other time the method is called. So we went with the first option. We are going to somehow hack the permission manager so that in this one place, when requesting group permissions from image auth, star will not have read writes. And now let's look at the content of the actual get group permissions method. If we ignore some stuff around it, here is the entirety of the logic to get group permissions. It's just calling some other service with a similar method. So rather than needing to hack the entire permission manager, we just need to hack that group permission lookup. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a custom service that pretends to be the group permission lookup, but will intercept this one call in this one place and do something else. We're going to call that service wrapped permissions lookup because I don't have original namings for my code. It's just wrapping a permission lookup. MediaWiki does provide a way to redefine services by calling redefine service. Even though most services are not stable to extend or implement, we are explicitly deciding that we are going to do something that is unstable and take all the risks associated with that because we don't want to hack MediaWiki core and we want to implement this functionality. And we can do this because even though most things aren't stable to extend or implement, they are possible to extend or implement. I think there was exactly one service I found that was not extendable or implementable. I want to say it was Password Factory. And there were maybe 7 services that were stable to implement or override. Config. The get main config will return a config instance, and that is an interface that you can implement yourself. So we're kind of in a gray area where it's possible, and MediaWiki provides a clear way to do it, but it's unstable. And we're going to do it. Because among those services that it's possible to override is group permissions lookup, which is possible to extend. It's not stable to extend, but it's not marked as final. So what does this wrapper look like? Well, for all the other methods, other than permissions lookup, or gate group permissions. It'll just delegate to the original. But in this one call, when the immediate caller is from permission manager, singular, permission manager, gate group permissions, and the caller before that is WF image auth main, then we're going to do something else. This is why I said the .15 is going to matter, because I don't believe this is mentioned in MediaWiki's stable interface policy, but back traces should not be considered stable. The path through which a hook or code path is executed by MediaWiki core is not stable and might very well change from one MediaWiki version, one patch version to another. And in fact, because of the way this is designed, where we're saying, let's check the caller, and if it's not what we care about, we'll just do the original. If the backtrace were to change, we would just be making everything public. And so this extension is pinned not just to the 1.39 version, but 1.39.15. The extension only supports versions it's been explicitly tested against to the patch level. So here is the entirety of the override logic. We say, if you are asking about the rights for star, and you are being called from the permission manager, and that was being called from image auth main, we know that that's only going to be the isPublic variable being set. That's the only code path that exists in 1.39.15 that has this exact backtrace. And so we're going to say the result is all of the original permissions except read. And that way, we're going to get to the response not being cached and the user can hooks getting executed. And that's how we'll decide, OK, it's not public in general. How about this file? And that's how we configure the visibility restrictions. The user can is going to run a few checks. We're going to listen for the get user permissions errors expensive hook. We don't need just the general get user permissions errors, because we know that A, this code path is going to use the expensive hook, and B, we only care about this code path. We only care about calls for user can for this hook in one exact place in image auth. We can, in fact, also limit our code to only pay attention to when the entry point is image auth. That way, we can still allow users, even anonymous users, to read the content of file description pages, because that's not looking at the image source. It's looking at the wiki text description. MediaWiki outputs all of your data as HTML, but when it's outputting an image, it's just using an HTML image IMG tag and linking to the source as your image auth. And so all of the requests that we care about for file content come through this one place. Now, to look in that black box, we decided to configure if a file is public or not based on the make file public magic word that's added. By default, files are going to be private unless this is added. You could do it the other way. You could add a make file private keyword and invert the logic. But the client wanted things to generally be private unless explicitly marked public. So we only support the specific versions, including patch versions, of MediaWiki that are tested. MediaWiki does not follow semantic versioning in a general sense. It's still on 1 dot something. And as far as I know, there are no plans for a MediaWiki 2.0. I've been working on a talk for another conference about semantic versioning, and MediaWiki is a great example of having a very clear, stable interface policy of here is what is stable and here is what is not. Even if it doesn't always follow that and sometimes makes breaking changes and sometimes adds stuff. But the stable interface policy doesn't discuss patch releases. It doesn't say what can change between 1.46.1 and 1.46.2, for example. So even if it always followed that policy, the policy is incomplete for what we care about. And because the stakes are so high, where if we mess up and the backtrace changes, things will just always be public. We need to make sure, we need to have someone actually compare, okay, what is the code path that is executing for the image authentication, and what caller is being used, and how does code get from the entry point to the hook to allow us to make this extension work. Otherwise, we would just fail quietly. And so the compatibility policy of the extension is exact patch releases. It currently supports, I think, 1.39.15 and 1.43.5, and nothing else. If we want to update to 1.43.6, you have to update the extension code as well, even if it's just to say we also support that patch, so that you can't accidentally forget that step. Here is the code for this extension is public. That's why I'm able to introduce it to you all. And if you look on GitHub, you can see here's the code that we actually needed to change in order to support 1.43. The entirety of that WF image auth main function was removed. It was replaced with the use of a new entry point class. So the backtrace changed. It's no longer going through permission manager. It's no longer calling get group permissions. It's calling group has permission or something else. So we had to actually check and make sure what's changed, because otherwise it would have just failed to open, which is not a good policy in this case. So what's next for this extension? It works. It works on 139.15 and 1.43.5, and it'll probably expand that a lot more than other extensions expand their version support, because we have to expand it for every patch release. But there are additional features that could be added at some point. And since this is public, if anyone wants to send a pull request, we could move beyond a binary distinction of is a file private or public, and instead say, this file is public, and this is private for all logged in users, and this is private for just some logged in users, and this is private and only the uploader can look at it. Moving beyond that binary distinction of public versus private. Confirming compatibility with newer versions of MediaWiki. Currently, the testing is done manually. Upload 2 files, one with that magic word and one without, and look at them logged in and logged out, and confirm that when you're logged in, you can see them both. When you're logged out, you can see the public one. And when you're logged out, you cannot see the private one. If we were to add end-to-end testing for a bigger upfront cost, it would likely be a lot simpler to add each new patch release. I still think we would want to say you have to list the patches specifically, but it would be a lot simpler to add a new one. Improved integration. The way that we tell MediaWiki that this wiki should not be public is by intercepting the group permission lookup for what rights the ** everyone group has. That's kind of a hack. It works, and all the best hacks do, but ideally MediaWiki would have some kind of hook for, is wiki public or not, instead of relying on permissions, so that we can draw a distinction between read rights and reading file content. Another option would be MediaWiki currently checks permissions for if you can see the file content as the file page with NSFile. There is, however, a built-in virtual namespace, NSMedia, which is used for linking directly to media from Wikitext. Perhaps if MediaWiki said all of our user can checks for image content will be done with the media title rather than the file title, we wouldn't need to have as strict of a check of, is this entry image auth? Because without that check currently, you would also be restricting file pages. In some ways, they could be transcluded or preloaded or so forth, and the content would still leak in a good way this time. But the fact that there is an NSMedia, but it's not used for checking media permissions, to me seems like something that could be changed. Of course, it would mean that anyone who's assuming it's going to be checking against a file will need to update their code. But the distinction between a file as a page that exists with a wiki text description, and media as some file, SVG, JPEG, PNG, in the file system, is one that this extension relies on and I think could be conveyed more clearly by using the media namespace in the permission lookups. So that's mixed visibility files. It's public on GitHub if you want to try it out, want to report any bugs. At this point, I'll take questions. Yes, Rich. Oh.
Are we doing the microphone?
I'm charging, so
Yeah, okay.
Just ask it and I'll repeat for the stream.
Okay. For a long time, image auth was not a valid point of entry. And for private wikis, this was a challenge because users would send links directly to the media, and then if we were using some kind of a pluggable auth identity provider, it would shut them down. Very recently, I think it was 1.45, they pluggable auth extension updated to include image auth as an entry point for IDP verification. My question is everything that you're doing tested against pluggable auth?
No.
Okay.
It's tested against MediaWiki core. But if we add end-to-end tests and we add pluggable auth, it'd be interesting to see how that works. Oh, sorry. For the stream, the question was, for a long time, image auth was not an entry point that was supported by some authorization extensions like pluggable auth. And so for private wikis where users would have a link to media and then send that to someone else, if they weren't already logged in, if they try and navigate to that, they'll just be shut down. Recently, in 1.45 or thereabouts, there was improved support for image auth, and it's now supported by pluggable auth. Question is, has this extension been tested with pluggable auth? The answer is no, it has not.
Sorry to make you do that.
No, it's fine. I should have done it. It also, rubber duck debugging, repeating the question helps understand it better too. Jeffrey.
Would you be willing to add support for RBAC-based mixed visibility? So like you have to be in a specific user group to see specific subset of files?
RBAC as a role-based access control. So the question is, would we be willing to add RBAC, role-based access control, to allow restricting image visibility to just some users rather than all logged in users or everyone? And this was, if I can skip through, the what next? The beyond binary. This is something that we'd be interested in. Wasn't something the client had asked for, so it wasn't part of the initial development, but it's something that's definitely possible and that I had thought about. We had said that it's a black box. I had said initially it's a black box of should this file be visible, and it's answering in a binary yes or no. It could easily be should this file be visible to the user and be provided with a username or user identity, user object, authority, whichever interface you want to type against. It's definitely possible. We've already written the logic to make sure that the results aren't, the image auth output isn't cached, and checks based on, in this case, it just is registered. But there is definitely room for expansion there. Without end-to-end testing, it does mean reviewing is going to be a bit harder because we need to test it out locally with even more combinations of files and users. But it's definitely possible.
We have a customer who wants that, so it might be coming soon.
OK, you can reach out to me or Ike, and we can talk about doing that. The code's also public, so I mean, you could just fork it and do it yourself, and ideally submit the improvement back to us. But we'll keep working on the extension. I liked writing it. It does work with other image backends as well, not just things that are in the /images/d/d5 on disk storage. Megan.
You might not be able to answer this, but I'm just very curious what the use case for this is.
So the question was what the use case for this was. And if I scroll back far enough, the use case is that we had a client that wanted to make some files public and some private while still letting anonymous users read all the pages.
Like, why?
So there are plenty of, maybe it's copyright. If they restrict who can create an account, you can have, I think it's a fishbowl wiki where everyone can see the content, but you need to be approved in order to edit it. You could have some files that's only for the editors because it has, industry secrets, and your company wants to be public. Or NASA, if they want to upload, patented design documents that are in the wiki so that the different editors can see them and discuss them while not exposing trade secrets to everyone, that's a potential use case.
Yeah. This is actually, this is long overdue, thank you. This is, the absence of this is why we have 20 wikis in the NASA production environment.
But you still have an issue with the page content also having to be separated, right?
With what?
Like, word cut pages also have to be.
Actually, no.
Oh, it's just the other.
So what everyone's okay with is the content pages, but what is sensitive between the wikis is the file uploads.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So for the stream,
That drives us to have multiple wikis for the different we treat, for every ACL that we have a different wiki. This would give us the ability, with the improvement, when you go beyond binary, and you can create, and you can apply that to groups, we can consolidate down to one.
so for the stream, Rich is saying that this is something that they've run into at NASA, where they're fine with the page content, the wiki text, or plain text, CSS, whatever content view, whatever content model, they're fine with that being public, but it's the file content specifically that they want to restrict, and so that's why they have 20 wikis. And so if this extension moves beyond binary, I tried to come up with some alliteration or the one for consonants, whatever the word, where beyond binary, confirming compatibility. But it is moving beyond just public or not to support ACLs is totally doable. The infrastructure around it is already there. The update would just be from is this user logged in, or is it marked as public, to what groups are configured for it. You would need to have some new way of configuring which groups are allowed to see which file, but there's now the community configuration extension that makes on-wiki configuration a lot easier. So it's something I'd definitely be interested in working on if NASA wants to take up this extension and use it. Anyone else? Any questions from the stream? Okay, I think that's my time. So going once, going twice. I'll be here the rest of the week if you think of another question.